Hi Year 10, Lesson 7 of Adaptations and Ecosystems today, and we are going to be looking at two cycles, the water cycle and carbon cycle. So our driving question is, why must water and carbon be recycled? We've got an awful lot of keywords there. Most of them you've probably met in some different sort of context. Some of them you might recognise from science lessons, some you might recognise from geography. But don't panic, we are going to be going through all of those in matching exercises, so you will know what all of those mean by the end of this lesson. So the carbon cycle is really, really essential. It must be recycled within an ecosystem because it is such a big key component of three major sort of nutrients that are basic building blocks in order to be able to build up into living organisms. So for example, it's a major component in carbohydrates such as glucose, and it's a major component in things like the amino acids that build up into proteins. So if we didn't have enough carbon, it would be very difficult for organisms to be able to grow. The carbon cycle is really a good example of how ecosystems are interdependent, because the carbon actually goes between biotic and abiotic sort of stores. So it goes through living things such as I described earlier, in glucose, so it's used in respiration, it's made by photosynthesis, but it's also in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So you can see how the carbon dioxide turns into the glucose, and then we actually turn it back into carbon dioxide through respiration. So it's a really important kind of indicator of whether an ecosystem is balanced if you've got the right amount of carbon in the biotic and abiotic sort of stores, if you like. It's constantly going on, and at the moment we are kind of shifting that balance a little bit, so it's not doing too well, and we'll look at that a little bit later. It's constantly being removed from and returned to the environment. It's being constantly moved between living organisms, and it's constantly being put back into the atmosphere. It's an amazing cycle, and it's very intricate. So these are some of the keywords that I showed you at the beginning, and all the ones I've listed here are all ones that actually involve carbon in some way. So I want you to see if you can match the description to the process. You don't have to write them all out, but I have got on Show My Homework a PDF, which means you can print it if you would prefer to, if you've got the ability to. But if not, you can just write A3, for example, if you think that's what the answer is. So pause the video, read through them all, and see if you can figure it out. So the answers, hopefully you've got these all right. Some of them you might find easier than others. So decomposing is when things break down, and it normally happens to dead organisms, although it can happen to some living sections, which is not great. And it releases carbon-containing compounds. So it's an important part of the carbon cycle. Also, the things that are doing the decomposing also are respiring, and therefore actually releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So decomposing is quite a big part of the carbon cycle and often overlooked. Process B is respiration. Hopefully we all got this one. It's producing energy in living cells. And I put producing in inverted commas because you can't make energy, but you convert it from one type to another. And in our respiration process, aerobic respiration, we release carbon dioxide. For process C, combustion, this is when we burn things, and generally it releases carbon dioxide. The D, transformation, if you think about Optimus Prime, he changes from one form to another, but all of his components sort of stay the same. He hasn't sort of had anything added or like lost. So he's not changed chemically, he's just changed from one physical form to another. So a really good example of that is actually coal. Coal isn't predominantly made of carbon, it's got some impurities in there, but if you put coal under immense heat and pressure over a long period of time, it actually turns into diamond. It's not changed chemically, it's still carbon, but it's now turned into diamond. So that's an example of transformation in sort of real form, as cool as it would be if Transformers were real. E, excretion, excellent keyword, one of my faves. Releasing waste. So a lot of people just assume it's talking about poo and wee. It's not. It's any kind of removal of anything from the body. So sweat, for example, is a form of excretion. The water vapor coming from your breath is excretion as well. but it can release carbon-containing compounds in your feces. It also obviously is when you breathe out, you're going to be releasing carbon dioxide, so you can class that as excretion too. For F, photosynthesis, that is when we convert sunlight into glucose. Only green plants or green living organisms can do this. So they take in carbon dioxide, and there's a chemical process that happens with water, and they produce glucose from that. Consuming, hopefully that's fairly simple and straightforward. Eating. So you're consuming your food when you eat it. So hopefully you got an okay there. And I want you to try and use those sort of definitions to try and figure out how all these processes end up in a cycle. So I've tried to find the most simplistic diagram. I've just noticed number 5 in that oval in the sort of top left isn't, it should have a number 5 in it. So you can either sketch it if you prefer, but you will have to be doing that later, so maybe don't waste your time now. You can just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then you can try and fill in the description using the words on the left or phrases on the left to show what's going on where. So the arrow shows the direction of the carbon. You don't necessarily need to know what form the carbon is in at that particular point, but see if you can sort of match up the process with the cycle. So for example, but also just to point out, for example, feeding on this diagram is actually the same as consuming. Different questions will come up, use different keywords, so I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable with all of the different descriptions. So pause the video, see if you can figure out how they go, and we'll go through it in a second. So this is what our carbon cycle should look like. So you can see the biggest store is carbon dioxide in the air, and we've got a lot of processes that put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So it's really important that that one process, photosynthesis, is removing as much carbon dioxide from the air or the atmosphere as possible. So things like us cutting down trees, us using artificial grass in our gardens instead of actual grass, is actually slowing down that carbon dioxide going into plants, and therefore we're ending up with more and more carbon dioxide in our air. And I want you to think about all the issues around that. And also we're doing more things like burning fossil fuels and combustion. So we're obviously causing more carbon dioxide to be put in the first place. So there's some issues going on around human activity and the carbon cycle and how we're disrupting it. If you have an animal die, so point 4, death and waste, for example, if there is no ability to decompose over millions and millions of years, that's how fossil fuels get formed. But obviously that is not really happening at a particularly fast rate, so we are running out of fossil fuels. More to the point, the same amount of carbon would still be going into the atmosphere through natural decomposition. It's just that it's happening at a faster rate because we're burning fossil fuels at the same time. So let's have a look at another cycle. We've got the water cycle to look at as well. So why is water so important? Why must we have water in our ecosystems? It's absolutely one of the it is the most vital part of all living things require it. We need it. If we didn't have liquid water on our planet, we wouldn't be able to be alive. So that's one. It's so important, the water cycle, and it does really often get overlooked. It actually didn't used to be in the science specification, so which is a bit crazy in my opinion. So I'm glad it's in there now because it is so important. So we need water in order to allow chemical processes to happen in our body because things need to be dissolved, they need to be able to move around, and the water content of our body allows that to happen. And for example, plants, they wouldn't grow if they didn't have any water. And plants are obviously they are the primary part of the food chain in all food chains. They are the producers. They are the only way we can get energy from our sunlight into our food chains. So if we didn't have plants because they weren't able to grow because there was no water, nothing would be able to feed on them, and anything that fed on what feeds on plants they wouldn't survive. So we'd end up with no living things. So water is so, so important. And yeah, I'm glad it's in the specification now. So these are some processes that involve water in our water cycle. So this particular topic you might have come up against in geography as well, and so some of these keywords you've probably met before. So have another go at matching them up. Do exactly what you did last time. You can either, I think it's already on the bottom of the keyword printout if you have printed it out. But if not, just do what you did before. So you put D2, for example, if you thought that was the right answer. Have a go. So let's go through these answers. Condensation, a very typical process that happens in science. In this case, though, we're particularly looking at how clouds form. So it's when water vapor cools back into a liquid state and clouds form. A lot of people actually mistakenly think clouds are gas. They're not. They're liquid. Little tiny droplets, teeny tiny ones. Respiration, same as last time. It's really obviously very important, and you can see it comes up in both the carbon cycle and the water cycle. It's producing, again, in inverted commas, energy in living cells, and it does release water. Cooling, in this case, we're talking about clouds again. It's when temperature decreases, and this is when the clouds get more dense. So as they get more dense, they get sort of thicker, and they're more likely to rain. So as clouds get higher up in our atmosphere, they will cool, and then they will become more dense, and then they will probably release rain. D, I actually gave you the answer. I didn't realise when I gave you the example of how to lay it out. Precipitation is rainfall. So not to be mixed up with in chemistry, we also talk about precipitate or of solids coming out, two liquids adding together. It's also rainfall. So read the context and work out which type of precipitate we're talking about because it's one of those classic English words that has two meanings. Evaporation, hopefully we know this one too. When water warms up and it turns into water vapor, it's when any liquid, doesn't have to be water, turns into a vapor or gas. Transpiration, if you haven't done the plants topic yet, this is when a water vapor is lost from plants. So it gets released from the underside of the leaves and is evaporated off. And that's known as transpiration. It's actually the process of how water gets sort of sucked up a plant and how it allows the roots to absorb water. It kind of is like a long chain reaction. And then a really cool word, percolation, is when we filter through a porous material. So, for example, water trickling through soil and rocks as it goes down a hill will become more pure because it's getting all the large impurities removed from it. If it's got really, really fine sediment that it's got to sort of filter through, then it will start to become even more pure. And that's how things like bottled water, like Buxton, etc., claim their water becomes so pure and gets lots of excellent minerals added to it because it filters through these porous rocks and comes out all clean and nice for you to drink. So that's percolation. So again, using now your understanding of those definitions of those processes, I'd like you to see if you can figure out the water cycle. So I've given you the list of keywords on the left there, and I want you to see if you can just write, number one is precipitation, if that's the one you think it is, and see if you can figure it out. Pause the video and have a go. So you should have got this. So as the oceans get heated up by sunlight, and just as they slightly get warmer on the surface, water does evaporate into water vapor. You also get water being added to the atmosphere through transpiration and respiration of living things. So transpiration from the water coming out from under the underside of leaves, trees and plants, and respiration of all living things. So that adds to the water vapor store in the atmosphere. As that water rises and it cools down, it condenses, and therefore it will start to form clouds. So you get the clouds being formed. But as they cool even further, as they go even higher, they become really, really dense, and you can see them getting thicker in the diagram there. Once they've got thick enough and dense enough, they will release these, and the droplets get big enough, they will release the droplets, and that's rain. So precipitation then occurs. As the rain hits the ground, it will then percolate through. It will actually go into what we call the water table, which is like an underwater store of rainwater, and that's where a lot of trees and plants will send their roots really far down to kind of access this water store. If it hasn't rained for a long time, for example, cactuses sometimes have that really long root that we talked about in the adaptations lesson. So the percolation can go really deep underground in some situations, and it will either go in an underground river back to the oceans, or it will be, like I said, found by plants and therefore absorbed in the roots, and then the whole process begins again. So it's a much more sort of simple cycle than the carbon cycle, but I think personally it's got a few more sort of tricky keywords, and it's important to remember that transpiration and respiration happens from living things as well. So they seem to like graphs as well for this particular type of topic. They seem to like it for all of this topic really, the data handling. So let's have a look at this question together, and then there's one that I'd like you to try it on your own. So this question is about carbon. The graph shows the mass of carbon added to and removed from the atmosphere each year. So you can see there's a line down the middle that says 0, and then you've got the added to the atmosphere on the left, on the left, and then removed from the atmosphere on the right. It's given you the names of the processes for all of them bar one. And so it says process X is by plants and algae. So it's the only one that's been on the right hand side of the graph, meaning it must be something that is the only process that removes carbon from the atmosphere. And also there's another big clue. It says there that plants do it. And what's the only process that only plants and other green things can do? Yep, photosynthesis. So that's our first answer. Then asks us to calculate the mass of carbon added to the atmosphere by respiration per year. And it wants us to give the answer in billions of tonnes, and luckily the graph is in billions of tonnes per year, so that's okay. We don't need to do any converting between units, and that's also indicated by the number of marks allocated because it's only one marker. However, there are 3 different respirations, so we are going to have to do some simple maths and add them up. We need to add up the respiration by plants and algae, respiration by animals, and the respiration by microorganisms. So, if 10 squares represents 50 billion, if you look on the top one there, you can see there's 10 little squares and it goes up to 50 billion. Then you can do some simple division, so 50 billion divided by 10, to find out that each little square is therefore worth 5 billion. So if we add those together, we've got the top one, which is 50 billion. The second one down is 60 billion because it goes another 2 boxes over, so that's 55, 60 billion. And then the bottom one there within the respiration options, you can count the number of boxes and you should find it's 30 billion. It should be 6 boxes along, as long as my glasses were on properly. And then we've got, just to add those together, and it's 140 billion. That's your answer there. We've got the final part of question B. Some scientists are concerned that the mass of carbon in the atmosphere is changing. How does the data in the graph support this idea? So if we read that question again, it says it's changing. How is it changing though? Is it going up or down? And what is the graph actually saying to actually agree with that? So what I thought would be a sensible place to look is the fact that they've split it into added to the atmosphere and removed from the atmosphere implies that we can easily do a bit of a comparison. We can see if there's a difference between the total amount added and the total amount removed. So we added up all of the respirations already, and then we've got the combustion bit as well that we can add on to the carbon that's added to the atmosphere. So it's the 50, 60 and the 30, but then we've also got the little bit of combustion, which is a little bit more, so 10 billion added as well. And so we've got 150 billion is currently being added every year. But luckily, that line for the photosynthesis of plants and algae is quite big, so hopefully it should match it. But let's have a look. It's actually only 140 billion. It's just shy of, as you can see, of that 150 on the scale. So it's actually having 10 billion extra added to the atmosphere every year. So the data in the graph does support that it's changing, and it's supporting that it's actually increasing in the atmosphere. So it's increasing because 10 billion more tonnes are being added. You could actually just get a mark for saying that it's not balanced, but I think it's really good to show your full understanding of that graph by showing your mathematics and your data handling skills, by showing, one, that it's increasing, and two, that it's by 10 billion, and it's because it's being added to the atmosphere. So have a go at this question. It looks a little bit more difficult, but it's not. They've just done the same sort of graph in diagrammatic form. So they've done it in an illustration. They've got the atmosphere going around the outside as the carbon dioxide store, and then they've got carbon in the earth, if you like, in the pie chart in the middle. And then the arrows going between them with the description of the processes involved and the amount of carbon going in and out is indicated on the arrows. So see if you can have a go at those questions. You can see there's a little bit more maths involved in the first one because it's 2 marks. So see if you can figure it out, and we'll go through the answers in a moment. So pause the video and give yourself as much time as you need. So for X, we've got the amount of carbon that's increasing by in the atmosphere. They've done into the ocean for you, which is nice, so that could make your life a little easier. However, I've done it probably the way I would assume most of you have done it, to calculate X, which is the amount of carbon being increased into the atmosphere. So how much is actually going into the atmosphere? We've got the biological and chemical processes there, the 90. We've got respiration there of 55. We've also got deforestation of 1.2, decomposition of 55, and we've also got this 5 over here of fossil fuel use. So if we add all those together, you get 206.2. However, we have got some being taken out. So how much is being taken out? We've got the biological and chemical processes of 93 there. We've also got 110 over there from photosynthesis. So if we add those together, we get 203. Do the difference between the two, and we can find we've got a difference of 3.2. So that is the carbon increase into the atmosphere every year. 3.2 billion tonnes of carbon. Give one reason why deforestation increases the carbon dioxide concentration of the atmosphere. So you need to, you could use just your scientific understanding if you like, but you could, if you're struggling, you can look at the diagram and find where the deforestation section is. It's involved over here with the plants. Obviously, deforestation is removal of forests. You can see it's got the photosynthesis, big arrow there. It's also got decomposition. It's also got respiration involved as well. So you can kind of discuss any of those issues. You could say something like deforestation itself releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You could say when the trees are removed and then decomposed, this will increase decomposition into the and release of the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You could go the other way and say if there's if there's less trees, there's less photosynthesis to happen, so less carbon dioxide will be removed from the atmosphere. So that's the one I went with, because I said if there's less trees, there's less photosynthesis to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So that's why you will end up with more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than you started with. So hopefully you got something along those lines for part B, but it's quite interesting that they do seem to like adding in questions about data for a start, but they also seem to like asking about how humans are affecting these cycles. So do keep that in mind. So let's check our understanding before we move on. We've got why are carbon and water recycled? Pause the video, have a look through, and once you're ready, check your answer. Choose your A, B, C, or D. Answer is D. There's only a certain amount of them and they change between different stores. So we need to make sure we've got the right balance in the right stores at the right time. If you didn't get it right, please go back through the video or have a look at the BBC Bite Size website, which is on Show My Homework and as a link. and have a little review before you have a go at this written task. So as always, our 4 questions or 4 tasks. We've got describe the carbon and water cycles. So what do they show? Why do we have them? What is actually going on in those diagrams that we looked at earlier? Basically, it just shows the processes of how water and carbon get moved within different stores, or it's how all the different processes link, anything like that. For grades 3 to 4, you need to explain how carbon and water are recycled. Now, you could write this, but I think you'd be there all day. And you'd also probably get really quite confused, saying how carbon goes into this and out of that. So, what I would recommend is drawing and labelling your own diagrams. You can go back through the video and test yourself if you wish by drawing it again, or I have put blank versions on Show My Homework, so if you can print them, or if you want to look at that to sketch one out yourself, that's probably a really good idea. So they do often show you a diagram of a carbon cycle and have gaps in it on the foundation paper, and that sometimes comes up on the higher paper, but not as often. So it is important that you can recognise what the processes are. For grades 5 to 6, explain why the carbon and water cycles are so important for maintaining ecosystems. So that's where you would talk about, for example, carbon being in carbohydrates, proteins, fats, how it's vital for living things. How water is so vital for living things because it's if plants don't have water, they won't grow. All those sorts of things. So it's kind of giving them the importance of why we are learning these cycles, really, and because they're so crucial for ecosystems. And then for grades 7 to 9, what are we doing as humans that could be affecting the carbon and water cycles? I mentioned it about the carbon cycle in the exam question, but don't forget the water cycle. Have a think, what are we doing that actually might be disrupting different sections of that water cycle? So pause the video, go through those and see how you get on. So answers, grab a different colour pen, green if possible, tick it, obviously, as always. If you feel like the need to add extra detail, add it in, not a problem. But if you got it wrong, do change it. So you've got the correct notes to revise from. So why must carbon and water be recycled is the kind of key question here. What we show it's being recycled by using carbon and water cycles. And what do they show? They show how they are recycled, moved into and out of and within our environment or ecosystems. You could say it links all the processes of the cycle, of how carbon and water are used, anything like that, or words to that effect is fine. For grades 3 to 4, you needed to ideally draw it. If you wrote it, I sincerely hope you didn't get too frustrated, because I would. Nearly always they ask you for it in a diagram form. So it should look something like this for the carbon cycle. Pause the video and check yourself if you need to. And it should look like this for the water cycle. Again, pause the video if you need to check it. I don't think they're too difficult diagrams to draw, but if you could print them, then obviously it made your life a little bit easier, didn't it? For grades 5 to 6, explain why the carbon and water cycles are vital to maintaining ecosystems. So carbon is that major component of those major nutrient groups, and in particular water is so important because all living things require it, and plants wouldn't grow, and therefore other things that can need plants because they're a producer for the first stage of the food chain wouldn't be able to consume them, and then they wouldn't be able to survive. For grades 7 to 9, how are we as a human race affecting these cycles? So, for example, you would want to definitely mention deforestation. It affects both cycles. So if you remove trees, less carbon dioxide is being removed from the atmosphere due to less photosynthesis, like we talked about in that exam question, but there's also the other issues, such as we're inputting more carbon dioxide in because just the deforestation process does. But also, if you think about the water side of things, you've got less transpiration happening, so less water is being added to the atmosphere. So deforestation is quite a key one. Other ones you can think of, I mean, there's plenty that you could have added. If you want to check any with me, feel free to email me or message me after my homework. But for example, if you think about the water cycle, we're building so many more buildings, and we're tarmacking or cementing so much more than we ever have because of our growing global population and the need to change land into sort of usable living land. We're affecting percolation, so that's why we're getting more things like floods, because water's got nowhere to go. It can't get to the soil and seep into those underground stores. So that we're disrupting the water cycle there. We're also combusting a lot of our fossil fuels at a much more alarming rate than we have done before. So we're adding more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere all the time. Coupled with that deforestation is also causing the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to get bigger quicker. So we're not doing a very good job at the moment. So decide where you got up to, write your today IIG sentence, and pause the video if you need to, or go back in the video if you need to. But as ever, we've got a 10-question quiz. I'll show my homework, so have a quick go at that, and don't forget the 3 attempts before we let your parents know how you got on. See you next time.